Welcome to Unlapped. We're officially here in Las Vegas for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. The Drivers' Championship could be won this weekend. Meanwhile, the Constructors are still fighting it out. Let's dive right in. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like this video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to ESPN for more F1 content. If you're listening, hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's get into it. Nate, Laurence, hi.
Hello.
This is big. This is big.
Yeah.
First of all, you buried the lead there. It's your first Formula 1 race.
It's my first. Yes,
great to have you here.
First Grand Prix altogether, not just, I mean, I've been to Vegas plenty, but.
And I've got to say, feeling a bit more alive than last year. This race last year, I think, basically killed every single person in this paddock.
Well, it's me.
Yeah,
obviously.
I think that is it.
What's
that is the one
changed?
difference.
I'm
that
here.
is the one difference.
Well, Nate, I also want to say this is just media day.
That's true.
A car hasn't been bolted together yet, let alone left the garage.
True.
So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But last year was a roller coaster ride, wasn't it? I mean, it's kind of everything you might have expected from a Las Vegas Grand Prix, because it just went wild from the first practice session with
Carlos
covers coming out of the ground. It was actually a water valve cover, to be technical, but coming out of the ground, and then like the late session, the fans having to leave before the cars went out on track properly. But then, in like true Vegas fashion, it somehow all came together.
Yeah, which is there was a video recap I was watching of this race last year, and I just forgot the drama. Like, you kind of bury it all to the back of your mind.
Well, you always, we talked about recency bias in the last episode, right?
Yeah,
so a little bit of that. And also, it is often said in show business that a poor dress rehearsal makes for an incredible opening night, and Vegas is certainly a city of glitz and glam.
And it was a really good reminder that ultimately, and it's not just a lesson for Formula 1, but in any sport, the final product is what people care about. You know, you can put all of the glitz and glamour on. You can have, funny moments like with Perez and the announcement at the beginning. All of that stuff's great. If the show at the end's great, then you kind of win. So if it had been the other way around for Vegas, if everything had been great and then the race had been terrible, I think that would have really looked bad. So I don't know if they'll replicate that again, but I think they've come into this race, and I don't know if you feel the same, Laurence, but Vegas seem a lot more confident and calm, and in terms of the guys organising the race, and I think that comes from that a lot. So.
Yeah, you'd agree this time. I will say, when I was in the taxi on the way from the airport to the hotel, the taxi driver said to me straight away, "Are you here for the race?" "Yes, I'm here for the race." "Why else would I be in Vegas for 6 days?" I'm not trying to kill myself. And he said, "Oh, it's so much more organized than last year. You're going to have an incredible time." So.
Well, what's funny about that, with anecdotally, mine said he's leaving town for 6 days because it's going to be so hectic. So, but then again, he said because how busy it's going to be and how kind of logistics. So, but my guy's already long gone. He said he's going to LA for the weekend.
Oh, I had something in between. I had an Uber driver who hadn't quite decided yet what he was going to do. He had the same thinking, like, it was so bad last year, because of course they have to close the centre of the city to allow the cars to race round, and he had such a tough time, made far less money than he would normally. The casinos did fantastically last year. They made a huge amount of money, but a lot of the local businesses, a lot of the Uber drivers, they had a tougher time. So I think Vegas has, or the organisers of this race, have learned their lessons from last year, and I'd like to say I think they're a little bit more confident going into it, but you're not going to please everybody with something like this, because this is one hell of a show.
I will say that I am completely impressed. My first time as a rookie. Walked in behind George Russell today. He was wearing Dockers, or Docker pants, surprise, surprise, khakis.
Very George. Yeah.
Yes. Have you seen any surprises yet? I know we're very early days here, but anything that's caught your eye or been not just different than last year, but maybe different than any other race? I mean, obviously we're in a desert, and at the last race, it was a tropical storm. So there's some antithetical moments there.
Hard to beat that. I think the thing that has always surprises me now about coming to America is just the amount of people you see now who have F1 merch on, just everywhere. Laurence and I can remember before COVID, before Drive to Survive, you'd come into Austin, obviously Austin was the only race then, you might not see people until you got to race day, or until you got to the days when there was stuff on the circuit, and you'd see actually people wearing kit. You see all sorts of stuff in town now, and you just see billboards everywhere, and obviously in Vegas everything's maximized. So I think that always still surprises me in a good way. It's just nice to see. But no big surprises. The thing that always surprises me, and I think, Liz, you're going to get this through the week, I think people get blown away just how this paddock is just, people are just walking around. You'll just see Russell, you'll see Lewis coming down on the scooter, you'll see people like being chased by paparazzi. It's mad. And there's no other sport where you have like this little concentrated, like massive athletes all together for such a little period of time.
That in Vegas is particularly interesting when you're talking about spotting things that may not normally belong in your regular vision. I took a walk today down the strip, and I saw showgirls shopping at Target. So I remembered very quickly that I was in Vegas. Though, ladies, I would say maybe if you could F1 merch your feathers or something.
They
that
could
might
little
be
checkered
better.
flags, maybe.
Yeah.
That would. That's the look. Not that I've been thinking about it, Liz, because I know
was
you're going to throw that back to me. I'm on to you after last episode. Just a suggestion, everyone.
I
Just a
love that
suggestion.
you're already noting the showgirls' outfits, Nate.
Yeah.
We're on it here. All right. Well, a driver who needs no notes, frankly, is Max Verstappen. He could leave here crowned the 2024 champion and secure his 4th consecutive title. What needs to happen, in your gentlemen's estimations, for Max to take home the title this weekend, other than making sure Lando doesn't outdrive him by 3 points?
Yeah, so the easiest way to look at it is if Max finishes ahead of Lando, he's won the title. But there are actually a whole bunch of other permutations, mainly because there's that fastest lap point that still exists for 3 more races in Formula One. And so if I don't know them off the top of my head, but if you go on F1's Instagram, it's got this full list of if this happens with Max, then this happens with Lando. The reality is he's right on the brink of getting the title. And if he doesn't get it here, he's probably going to get it in Qatar. And he may even get it in the Qatar sprint race, which is what happened last year. And that's a bit underwhelming.
I think.
Kind of a bummer, right?
Vegas, Qatar sprint race, Vegas, Qatar sprint race.
I know which one F1 would prefer. They are
absolutely.
desperate. I mean, they're desperate for it to go to Abu Dhabi, but if it's going to end anywhere, they want it to end here. It will be
The fire. I'm sure there are fireworks purchased.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
right.
Well, so I was just speaking to the CEO of the race.
Incredible flex.
Nice little name drop there. It was a round table, everyone. It wasn't just me chatting to her. They said they've got about 15 things they've been gaming, planning in case Max wins the championship. They told me one completely off record, so I can't say it.
Okay.
It sounded amazing. But that's one of the options. They still haven't decided which one they want to do yet.
Okay.
And I think that last year, obviously, that great moment when the winners were in that little car. They've just got so many options here. You think about all the casinos, the landmarks and stuff like that. Like if Max wins, I think visually that would actually just be a really spectacular moment.
Well, what will be interesting is how much is Max up for that? Because we know,
Well,
we know
that-
Max
yes,
that's true. Yes.
in so
Well,
much
and I
show.
think Stefano talked to him last year, and I think he's talked to him again this week, and just been like, look, maybe if you are upset with the spectacle, maybe be a little less vocal about it because it doesn't help anyone. But what was funny last year, wasn't it, was that he criticised the spectacle, and then he went and won the race and kind of loved the post-race celebration anyway. So
singing Viva Las Vegas.
Yeah,
and,
exactly. So I think Max is slowly bought into it, and also if he wins the championship, he's not going to care. I think he'll actually massively embrace it. And I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I think coming off of Brazil, I think it'd be really fitting if Max won it here comprehensively, beats Lando again. I think he deserves to kind of draw the line. No one wants to see him win it by finishing 3rd in the sprint or 4th in the sprint. You know what I mean? Like next week, you want to see him do it in a good way. So hopefully he does it here.
But here's the thing to remember. I mean, it was a fantastic drive by Max in Brazil, but the tail half of this season, he's really been struggling. Those problems haven't gone away necessarily. Okay, Red Bull made a step in Brazil. In the dry, they looked a little bit more competitive. But had that race run normally in the dry, I think Lando would have been,
But
far
doesn't
down the
that
road.
frankly make Max look all the more dominant?
Oh, well, I mean, all the more impressive as well.
Yeah.
What won that race in Brazil was Max Verstappen.
His technique.
And also
His craft.
by the extent he did with, the fastest lap by over a second and things like that, that was all pure Max. But when you come here and the conditions are almost certainly dry, cold, which is unusual, and how the teams have to deal with that will be interesting, and who has a fast car will be interesting. I think it will be a very mixed up grid compared to what we're used to. But yeah, that kind of pure natural talent of driving in the wet, Max isn't going to be able to utilise that here. So he's going to have to find a good setup with the car, get comfortable with the car, which he hasn't been for so many races in his tail half of the season, and then obviously outperform Lando, which is not going to be easy because that McLaren, Brazil race aside, has been the best car in the last
62
few
points
races.
between Lando and Max officially.
Huge. And just to go back to the Brazil point, Laurence is right. I mean, with the weather, with Max, that was the difference between us coming here and it being 24, 23 points versus coming here and it being 62. The way that pendulum swung on that race day, at one point you were thinking Lando could be within 15 points leaving Vegas, if things keep going that way. So remarkable turnaround. I agree with you, Laurence. I think this looks like a McLaren race to lose. I think the big thing here, if Ferrari aren't in a good spot, which they're not seem to be, you can't ever work Ferrari out, but here last year they were really, really good.
Yeah.
So it might be a chance for Lando to win and put some, with a bit of a distance to Max, but even then I think if he finishes 6th or 7th or something and Lando wins, he can still wrap it up fairly comfortably in Qatar. So Max, the biggest thing about that race, other than being all-time and just fantastic, it's made it so easy for him these last 3 races. He doesn't have to do a huge amount, and he's finished in the top 6 every single race this season that he's finished, which
what
is
I'm hearing,
remarkable.
though, is that Lando has to do a lot to push Max away, to fend Max off, right? And I want to talk about, because this has been an interesting storyline both on the grid and off, the fight between Lando and Max, the struggle between the two of them, and whether it's been whether it has punctuated their relationship in a lovely way, perhaps?
Yeah, simply lovely way.
Simply lovely way, thank you.
No, I think their relationship's taken a bit of a battering in the second half of the year. You know, after the Mexico stuff, you know, where Max forced Lando off the track, they didn't have a conversation after that. I remember after Austria, they did have a conversation, because at that point, you know, I think Lando was very surprised about what Max did in Austria when, you know, he crashed into him and you know, all the stewards' inquiry afterwards. But I think that it took a bit of a hit there, and then since then the intensity of the title battle has made it harder for them to be buddies. But that happens in Formula One. You know, the drivers, when they're in these situations, this is their whole life leading up to this point. Everything that they've worked for. Of course, it's going to get a bit spicy. Of course, it's going to get difficult. I'm sure they'll make up once the title's decided.
Well, and it's slightly different because they were teammates, but similar happened with Lewis and Nico Rosberg in 2014. Yeah, very pally going into that year. And I think it took Rosberg a bit of time to work out that he was like, oh, Lewis is a stone-blooded killer. Like, he's a guy that when he has a chance to win a championship, he will just focus solely on that. And I think Lando's realised that now, that with Max, when Max gets in a race car, it's
interesting though
different.
how one would not. I mean, I think Lando's inability to grasp that is a testament to their personal relationship, because any of us could look at Max and understand exactly who he is.
But I think as well, it's the inexperience. Lando's not had that championship kind of situation, and I think this will help him in the long run. He'll go into next season, and you'd think, you could call it maybe naivety even. That naivety won't be there. Like, this year you can almost make some excuses for Lando and say, look, he wasn't in the championship fight before. McLaren really, none of us were backing them to do what they've done this season. Next year, if he goes in, and we can still see some of these kind of, you know, I guess, misjudgments or him underestimating Max's character, then you start to think, well, hang on, you know, you're not learning anything. I can kind of understand why he's been like that this year. Hasn't been great, but you can kind of see where it's come from. And I think that like after Mexico, what I noticed was Lando talked in a way that he hadn't before about racing Max, which beforehand it was like, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he's doing it intentionally. It then switched to like, you've got to race Max differently. You've got to, you know, I've got to be smarter, is what he said. I'm paraphrasing what it was, but there was that kind of admission of like, I have to change the way I'm viewing this. So I think he's kind of learned as this year's gone on, and I know that it's been easy to poke holes in what Lando's done on track, because there's been some moments when it hasn't been great, but hopefully that's the big takeaway for him this year, that he needs to step up to be world champion in 25.
I mean, that's what makes any sport so exciting, is that they are very different people. You know, Lando is a very different person to Max. He has a very different story. I mean, they both came through karting and everything. And also I think Lando, you know, he has been in title positions before in lower series and Formula and stuff. So, you know, there's an element of that experience there. Of course, it's different when you get to F1, but I think he is just a different person. And he said a number of times he wants to win this kind of fair and square. He doesn't want to win it by pushing someone off the track or anything like that.
Hungary happened, though.
Well, but there you go.
But I mean, that was very different. That was a situation that the team manufactured. They put him in the wrong position, and then, you know, he got the position back, which he kind of should never have lost if it wasn't for the team. That wasn't down to, like, you know, pushing someone off the track or anything like that, you know. So, I feel like with Lando, he's a genuinely nice guy, and he's had to toughen up a bit this year. And whether he brings that into next year will be fascinating as well, like you say.
And especially with Piastri there as well, not just Verstappen, because I think Piastri is very much in the Max mold of very much kind of, there's that kind of cold-blooded ruthlessness there a little bit that you can see. You know, you'd see it a little bit after the way he spoke about Hungary, to your point, Liz. I think Lando is it is a good example of nice guys don't finish first all the time.
Feeling it.
So Lando needs to kind of flip that around a bit. And just somebody once commented, he's like, you always bring back stuff about Max to 2021, but you can always see parallels in 21. Lewis had to change the way he thought about Max in that championship fight, and that was when they started colliding. Like, he started saying, I'm not going to race you in a different way, and he got so close to winning that championship. Maybe, you know, some people listening to this might argue he should have won that championship, and he did all of that by changing that mindset and doing it. It was like a flick of a switch, like, right, I can't be naive against this guy, I've got to race in a certain way. So I think Lando's got to do that, not just for Max, but for Oscar as well.
We want to see him bring his edge a little bit. Everybody likes that. We've talked about that in Carlos. We also talked about last week, Nate, how we discussed whether Max could be called the GOAT yet, and you gave your answer. I agreed with you, but I would like to hear Laz's opinion since I have you here now.
Whether Max can be considered the greatest
like
of all
what
time.
his legacy will mean,
undeniably.
assuming he wins today for the 4th consecutive time, and also noting that he just turned 27 in September. So there's, as Nate and I discussed last week, a lot of runway. It's hard to call someone the GOAT when they're like more of the kid, if you will.
Look, I mean, what Max has achieved so far and the potential he's got and his ability behind the wheel, I think is completely unquestioned. It's an impossible kind of conversation to have in Formula One in many ways because the sport has changed so dramatically. One thing Max will never have to experience is the level of danger that there was when Ayrton Senna was driving, and prior to that, in the 1950s, when really you were just sat in a bath of petrol going around the circuit with hay bales.
Bath of petrol. But still my American heart, Laz. Oh.
I mean, it was... it was an incredibly dangerous sport. And
do we need to take a break, Liz, for a second? Are you all right?
Okay. I need the warmth because it's getting chilly.
and so trying to make comparisons across those kind of decades is very tough. What is interesting is that we do have the comparison between Lewis and Max, and I think what we saw in 2021 was Lewis at his absolute prime and Max just starting to reach the top level. And I think Max has got more. He's got better since then. I think he's got even more to go. That was fascinating, and I think that title battle, I hope we get something similar again, a second shot at that, Max v Lewis, because those are the two drivers when we're talking about the modern era that we can actually compare and are both genuine contenders for the GOAT status.
I think Ferrari would also like to see that happen. Let's talk about the teams and the constructors now. McLaren currently leads the constructors by only 36 points. Will this come down to the last race of the season? Nate, let's start with you.
It's a really good question. I honestly think this race is fascinating in terms of Ferrari should be, I think, better here. They're worried about Qatar, aren't they? They're not sure what's going to happen in Qatar.
Well, McLaren's going to be quick there.
McLaren will be quick in Qatar. And Ferrari has marked that out for a long, long time. They're not going to be good there. The circuit just doesn't suit them. There's a lot of things going on there. So if McLaren comprehensively beats Ferrari here, McLaren are going to feel very comfortable that they can kind of push, whether they win it in Qatar or not, but give themselves enough of a buffer that it should be easy to do. I think McLaren is still on the front foot there, but last race it'd be great. I mean, what is it now? 36 points, like you said. So
yeah,
that can. I think Ferrari took 44 points out of that. I think in Austin alone. So you can take a massive chunk just from a good race result, but my feeling is that McLaren will kind of just ease that away in the next two races.
Do you think, Laz, the cold, I mean, I'm sitting here definitely, I'm squeezing my hand trying to stay warm. This is, I believe, historically the coldest race on record, second only to Silverstone, so maybe that's some British media bias, I don't know. Yeah. I've heard that's a thing. But obviously Ferrari did well here last year, and the cold would suit them. I think that's why, Nate, you're making the point that Qatar might not. So, Laz, do you think, how do you anticipate that the constructors and the teams will be trying to use the cold to their advantage?
So it's a funny race because traditionally you want, at most circuits, when it's hot, normal temperatures that Formula 1 races in, you want to look after your tyres. You want to be really careful with them because you want to
wait for tyre chat.
Yeah, you go, but, and this is what it's going to come down to, and I'm going to bore you both with it right now.
Do it, bore away.
So, traditionally you want to look after them, and that means you don't put a huge amount of energy through them. Now here, when it's this cold, you need to be putting that energy through the tyres to get them in the right operating window, to make them work, to kind of coax them into
Energy
life.
in the tyres is good for cold.
It is good when it's cold. And last
but
year,
not too much heat. That's the thing. That's where you meet the...
Well, but last year Ferrari consistently were destroying their tyres in almost every race, and they came here and they were very, very competitive because they could put that energy in the tyres. This year they've actually solved that wider problem of destroying their tyres at most races. So they're coming here thinking, actually, the advantage that we had last year we might not actually have this year because because we're not putting the same kind of energy into tyres. However, there's a number of setup things. There's driving style as well, what the driver's actually doing behind the wheel, that can contribute to that. So the teams now have a whole year of data. They didn't have that last year. Of course, they're coming here for the first time, experiences temperatures like this for most teams for the first time. I'm sure there's some engineers in the paddock who have done cold winter days of testing and stuff, but still, the tricks that they learned last year, they will apply this year. So I don't think it will be quite as random as it was last year, but if you look at the track layout, I think it's got Ferrari written over it more than McLaren. But yeah, you're right. Once we get to Qatar, fast corners especially is where the McLaren is super quick. So they think they're going to be quick there.
So we've talked about Red Bull, or Max, and we've talked about the McLaren, obviously, and Ferrari. We haven't talked about Mercedes. Are you surprised at how little they've been in the mix?
A little bit. I think their season, and at one point in the middle of the year, I thought what we're seeing now with Ferrari, I thought a lot of us assumed we were going to get from Mercedes. We had them win. Obviously, they won in Austria. They inherited that win when Max and Lando came together. Won in Silverstone.
Yeah.
Took the 1-2 in Belgium, which obviously just became Lewis's win when George got disqualified. But the pace there, you suddenly thought, actually, looked like we're seeing something out of them. And yeah, I am surprised. They've lost their way somewhere a little bit. And I think that there's a lot going on there. Obviously, Lewis is leaving. There's been it's kind of an odd situation there. I don't think there's anything nefarious going on, like people in some areas of social media suggest.
Like Jeremy Clarkson had success.
Yeah, but I think that just generally speaking, it just feels like Mercedes maybe is in a point where there's a lot of focus already into next year. They've got a new driver coming in. They've got one driver leaving. I think that they've looked at it realistically. They know they're going to finish fourth. I mean, there's no chance they're going to finish lower or higher than that. I think when you get into that position as well, you look at it and you're like, all right, well, there's a lot of little gains we can make here, but they don't need to be kind of, really going super aggressively into these final 3 races. I don't think personally, when they've got stuff next year, they can try and hit the ground running into next season.
I'm not saying they're happy about finishing fourth. They're definitely not. They want to be in this championship battle as well, especially considering Red Bull have dropped the ball as much as they have in the second half of the year. But by finishing fourth, they'll actually have more wind tunnel and development time under the regulations, the way they're structured, going into 2026, which is such an important year because we have brand new regulations. So I think Mercedes have looked at it a little bit, and it is absolutely a period of transition there. Lewis leaving, Kimi Antonelli coming in next year. So with all of that in mind, I think they are kind of just in a way, and this is not true of any of these Formula 1 teams really, but in a way they are just kind of looking to get to the end of the year. If they can get a result out of it, great. But the other thing to say about the top 4, and including Mercedes in that top 4, is that the margins are so small, so small, and that's why we've seen so many different teams win in the second half of the year, because they've all caught up with Red Bull. Like Mercedes relative to Red Bull have made big gains this year. You can look at it and say that they're struggling, but actually compared to Red Bull, they've made gains. It's just that Ferrari and McLaren have made that step further, and so it's small things, and something like this, the weather. I mean, I don't think actually the Merc is that good in the cold, but things like the weather, things like just getting the setup right in those practice sessions can make the difference, and they're close enough that with everything going their way, they can still be competitive.
I like that you mentioned the margins, and I just wanted to reiterate the numbers in case people were wondering. McLaren has 593, Ferrari 557, Red Bull 544, Mercedes in fourth with 382, and then there's a giant drop to Aston Martin, who has 86, so not even in the triple digits.
Yeah, it's mad. I mean, Formula 1's kind of weird like this, isn't it? We've had this for a while where there's just been 4 teams who are in their own little fight, and then you almost have like a subcategory, and Aston Martin have been on top of that for the last 2 seasons. I'm not sure that's not going to change going into next year, but 2026, it'll be interesting to see if that gap between the big 4, kind of, we always, in football in the UK, we always talked about the big 4, and now that's kind of stopped being a thing, but that has been the case now for a little while. It's hard to remember when, like if you look at Alpine, like when they won, when they've won,
Let's
or
talk about Alpine. I think it's a good point.
when Aston have been in the podiums, it's like, oh, that's nice, but like often it's because another team has dropped the ball here or there, or there's been extenuating circumstances, like with Brazil. As good as those results are, it's very difficult for those teams below the top 4 to actually consistently be performing with those guys, which is a shame actually, but I think it's better having a big 4 than a big 2 or a big 1, because last year we basically had Red Bull, then 3, then the rest of the bottom. So
it's more exciting. And Alpine with the double podium finish in Sao Paulo, obviously. And
we're sat right outside the hospitality right now.
We are.
Yeah.
I believe, Haas obviously wasn't terribly pleased with
they
that
thought,
surprise.
Yeah, they thought 6th was coming their way, and now they've got like this wild card entry in there. And Alpine actually look okay. I mean, I know that result was kind of a product of that of what was happening in Brazil. They took the opportunity amazingly, but Alpine, I was talking to some of their guys, they were on the same flight as me, and they were like, we actually feel pretty good about this. We feel like we can, if it's a 3-race championship now with Haas, they feel pretty good about that, because now they're right in that mix. Mm-hmm. All they've got to do is kind of, it's the chances of doing something there is pretty good. So I think it's changed the whole mood set. That's a good word. Mood set's a good word. The vibe of the team. Like they were quite a very, very difficult year, and it's just flipped the whole thing around. I think if they finished 6th or even 7th, I think it would be a pretty remarkable turnaround, given where they were and given some of the stuff they've gone through. I know a team like that should be finishing there anyway, but they've just had such a rough year. It would actually feel like a really big step up for them, I think.
Yeah, and they've definitely made progress this year. When they started the season,
they looked dreadful.
I couldn't believe how far they were off in testing. I thought they must be doing something.
Well, they were at the back. They were literally at the back,
and a long way off the back as well.
And
I
suddenly thought like there must be something going on. And then the first race, it was like, no, they are there. They are in that position.
But if you actually take Brazil aside and you look at the last 6 races, Haas have scored points at 5 of them.
Yeah.
And the points difference is 2 points, I think I'm right in saying, between Alpine and Haas in the championship at the moment for 6th. So my money would still be on Haas to grind out a few more performances over the final 3 races.
Especially with that sprint race.
Get those points. Yeah, the sprint races there. Yeah, I mean, and look, Nick Hülkenberg has been performing really well throughout the year. Like, I think outperforming that car, putting it in places.
I think he's been one of the drivers of the year, like in a low-key way. He's been fantastic all season.
And Kevin has done that thing that Kevin just sometimes does, which is just wake up. I mean, sadly, it looks like coming towards the end of his Formula 1 career. He doesn't have a seat for next year. Very unlikely that he finds his way back into F1 after that. So he's kind of got a point to prove as well, and nothing to lose. And so I think really it's all starting to come together a little bit for Haas. So my money would still be on them, but Alpine, no doubt about it. The confidence, like you mentioned, talking to the guys on the flight, the confidence has increased immeasurably just off that one result in Brazil.
So it sounds like your prediction for 6th is Haas.
That's right.
Do you
that's
have
what I'll go with.
a prediction for the Constructors? And then Nate, go after.
To win the Constructors entirely, I think I'd still go with McLaren on the basis of consistency of performance so far this year, and then carrying that through the final 3 races. But like you said, this race is pivotal. It's a really good point that you made there.
Yeah. I still think McLaren, but I think it could be if McLaren has an issue with one or both of its drivers, it really does suddenly feel wide open in a way that it shouldn't really be. I think McLaren, if everything goes, even if McLaren have a fairly standard race here, I think they'll feel very good about it. I still think McLaren, but there's a big question there, which will be, I think it's actually almost more fun than the championship battle itself because of how close Max is to securing that.
There's
a lot of pressure, and I think McLaren will be feeling that way more than Ferrari.
And 6th place for Haas as well, do you believe?
Yeah, I think so, but I'm not confident in that prediction now. I would have obviously been before Brazil. It looks so obvious that was going to be the case. I don't know. I just think Alpine as well. I think that you've got Ocon on the way out there, and I think he wants to go out on a high. And that podium, there was something about that moment with Ocon and Gasly as well, talking in the pen afterwards. There has been kind of like a healing moment between the two of them a bit, and I think that a lot of the politics and the tension behind the scenes has actually been eased up a bit this year. They've got a new young team boss who's come in, and they really haven't put a huge amount of pressure on him. They haven't said you've got that. With Otmar, they said you've got 100 races to win a race. They've not done any of that this time. They've literally said, right, come on in. He said we want to be scoring podiums by 2027. Obviously, they didn't think they'd get one within the first 5 races, but it feels like they're just in a better space. So I still think Haas, but again, I'm going to caveat it with I can't make it confidently because, again, this race, if Haas have a shocker here and Alpine are back in the points, then suddenly, you've got 2 more races coming up where all Alpine then have to do is kind of play the numbers game.
And let's not forget RB as well, because they're also in that fight.
Yeah,
they're a couple of points further back again. But you got Yuki and Liam at that team, and I think
it's pretty fun actually when you start talking about it.
Liam has come in and just I think performed really well, got his elbows out. Clearly wants to prove himself for next year. Is still in contention for Red Bull seat if Checo continues to underperform.
I think Liam knows very well how Checo is performing in particular.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I mean,
he seems very attuned to that in his head. Yeah.
And that's absolutely it. If he can go and get the very best from that car, that car can score points still as well. And then there's Yuki as well, who I think is feeling a bit overlooked at the moment, and I think really should be considered for Red Bull if they do get rid of Checo.
He's been overlooked for about 3 years, hasn't he? I mean, that's very fair. Just on Lawson quickly, I'm going to ask him about it later when I have my interview. There's a song going around on TikTok about him, which is "I'm Liam Lawson, get out of my way, I'm Liam Lawson," and it's just whenever I see him race, it's in my head. I wonder if it's in his when he races, but he certainly races like that. Like a guy who's just literally like, I don't care who you are, if you're Alonso, if you're Checo, whoever. I'm going to try and pass you in an aggressive way. I think he's been great to really good breath of fresh air coming.
Yeah, some nice youth with some saltiness.
And apologies to people listening. That's terrible singing.
No, everyone's going to see that because I am demanding the social team clip it out and put it all over our platforms.
And then play it with the sound to see how badly I butchered it myself.
So you've mentioned how anything is possible and how there's obviously therefore a lot of intrigue at this particular race. So let's go ahead and talk about this race. I, as a Los Angelino based on the West Coast, want to remind all of my fellow West Coasters that the race for you all is on Saturday because of the Pacific time zone. It is a 1 a.m. East Coast race, technically Sunday on the East Coast, Saturday evening on the West Coast. Let's talk about the drama that was last year. You mentioned the drain hole, or I believe you called it a water something or
water valve cover.
A water valve cover.
It was a drain cover, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Carlos took a 10-place grid penalty because of the engine.
Yeah,
he had to step out a new engine.
Because of the damage it had done to his engine. I mean, it really destroyed the car completely.
And Fred Vasseur, it was one of the memorable moments of last year, was went straight from that session, went straight into the FIA press. He would have actually got some community service this year by the standards. He got rap on the knuckles, didn't he? He didn't get the Max treatment. But that was an example of a guy going into a press conference and really not wanting to be there, saying a few words they probably shouldn't have done. And yeah, I think F1 at that point we're all sitting in the media center thinking this race could be a complete disaster. And the amount of money that's gone into it. I'm glad it wasn't, because and obviously ultimately it all turned out well. But yeah, and I have to give Laurence his props for that. I had gone back to the hotel by that point, because by that point last year I was coughing so much. People in the media center were like, you sound ill. You need to go to bed.
That's gross.
Yeah, it was disgusting. Yeah, it was. I think people thought I was like spreading COVID or something around there. I was fine. Like, I didn't have anything. I was fine 2 days later. But I was just kind of watching it all happen on the phone. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, session started at 2:30 a.m. by the time they'd finished it.
Yeah, and they've changed the timings for that reason.
At 4, I think.
Yeah, which is just nuts.
What do you think race fans have to look forward to at this particular race?
Well, I think everything that we saw last year tells you that it's going to be a fantastic race. That run down to turn 14, 15, 16.
Yeah.
The overtaking manoeuvres we saw into there, the fact they're coming off the strip, probably one of the most glamorous, insane backdrops that we have anywhere in Formula One, and Formula One goes to some cool places. That in itself, is great. I think that's what you got to look forward to, and the fact that the field is way more compact this year than it was, at the front of the grid than it was this time last year. So I think you can have that and an even better race.
And this is a rare race where you can actually there's genuine overtaking here. We saw that last
99
year.
last year.
Last
99
year.
overtakes. Is that right?
And often you see those stats and you think, quite inflated just by DRS. But this is actually that long straight, as good as it is to look. Looks-wise, it actually sets up a lot of really good fights. We saw Max and Charles having that fight all of
longest straight of any grid, although some people think Baku, but Baku has three corners, so I don't really know how
the
it's
Baku
a straight.
one, well, it depends, because officially I don't know if that is a turn.
Well, no, they are corners, but it's flat out, so the driver's foot doesn't lift off the throttle.
Okay.
So it's a very long, flat out section.
Now tell me what they did with their tires, Laurence.
Straight. Sorry?
Now tell me what they did with their tires slowly.
Bathtub with what?
a bathtub of petrol.
A bathtub of petrol, yeah.
All right. Last thing I want to talk about, we've talked about all of the youth and the new blood on the grid, and obviously Vegas is a city of energy. So any predictions about how some of these younger drivers might fare? We have a ton of rookies coming in next year. Any dark horses, or you mentioned Yuki, which I thought was interesting. I love I said this last week, I love Carlos. He's not by any means a dark horse, but I love the wild Spaniard energy that he's bringing. Nate or Laurence?
Well, I don't know if to look out for in a positive way, but one guy who we've talked a lot about recently since he came into Williams is Franco Colapinto, and he had a rough weekend last weekend. It was the first weekend we really saw him look like a rookie, in the sense of big crash. There was a lot of talk Williams weren't going to make this race. wasn't based in much fact. Williams, always said we were going to be here, but the damage was so bad that story was kind of able to be out
cars,
there.
Right?
Yeah, both cars. Yeah, because Alex had the same thing.
In quali.
And this is any street circuit you come to. You just look at what happened with Lando Norris here last year. It's if you've got a slight twinge to your confidence suddenly, it's the worst place you can come, because one tiny mistake, and in a lot of places you can just run off and you're fine. Here, you don't want to be in that situation. So a guy like Franco Colapinto, I think we've all been super impressed by what he's done, but I think this will be an interesting race to see how he responds to setbacks like that, and responds to maybe pressure in a negative sense that may be coming his way. So I'd say watch out for him. I'm trying to remember last year. I think Yuki had a good race here last year. There's a lot of guys last year that kind of there was. I remember Yuki and Daniel last year. There was a massive contrast between the two, and that actually was when that kind of narrative shifted back again to being that Daniel looked like he was on the outs again. So I'd watch out for Yuki. I'd say Yuki, if I was going to put a kind of a wild card good performer in there, I'd put Yuki, because I agree with you, Laz. He's been overlooked for so long. He's so good, and he's kind of got the bit between his teeth at the moment as well.
Your dark horse?
I was going to go for Williams as well, partly because they're within my line of sight, both the hospitality and the
we're just being led by the names we can see.
Yeah, exactly. The neon lights everywhere. But no, because they put such an effort in to get those cars ready, and I feel like it would be the fairy tale story that after all that work back at the factory, there's a fantastic Instagram post and a few social media posts they did around how much work goes in back at the factory to basically repair carbon fiber, put these cars back together to make sure they have the spares to come here. One of the quotes from that was that they're actually in a pretty good place after all that, but it was some intense work. So I would love to see that rewarded with either Franco or, of course, Alex Albon, who I think is always a safe pair of hands.
Yeah.
He was unlucky with what happened in Brazil at Sunlight Castle. car failure.
And he was gutted in Brazil because I think he could have had we were talking about these guys on the podium. He could have been in that mix to have a real shock result if he hadn't had that crash, because he looked so good until he had that crash at the end.
All right, since we're here, we're going to finish up with, we've talked about predictions for the constructors. We've talked about dark horses. Who is your winner for the Las Vegas Grand Prix in 2024?
I'm going to say Charles Leclerc.
Okay.
And then Lando second.
Okay.
And Carlos Sainz third.
We're vibing.
Yeah.
We're vibing.
I like that.
I do think Ferrari is going to end, at least one Ferrari driver is going to end on the podium. Let me give you some race odds per ESPN bet. I'm a company woman. Max favorite to win by plus 200, Lando by plus 260, Charles by plus 300, Carlos by plus 600, Oscar at plus 1200, and then it just gets bigger and bigger after that. Who are you potentially wagering on were it a possibility?
On those odds, Oscar.
Yeah.
I mean, the McLaren is a quick car. I mean, Oscar's not had a great bunch of races coming here.
He's due.
But remember in Baku, he was fantastic. Yeah. Okay, Lando was kind of out of it because of what happened in qualifying.
Similar track.
And Oscar's very like this, isn't he? He's very like his highs, arguably, have been higher than Lando's in terms of like just outright one-off performances. His issue has been just up and down.
That's the issue McLaren has. I don't think they expected to have two number one drivers, and we've seen how that's played out over the course of the season.
Yeah. So I'm going to say Oscar also might place a bet later on that. Just
now you said the
numbers.
numbers.
If
only we knew. Yeah, if only we were in a good city to do
I know a guy.
So Oscar Piastri, second place. Let's say Max Verstappen wins the title, at least on the podium with a bit of style.
Yeah.
And then third place, Charles Leclerc. I think, I think he's going to be quick here.
The reason I didn't put that one, my prediction there is very much what would be great for both championships to happen. I do think Max will be in there at some point, but I'm hoping we see something different happen.
I'm going to say Carlos Sainz. I do think it's actually Charles, but I'd love to see Carlos win it. And then I think Lando will come in second and Max will come in third.
Sainz is a really good call, actually, because I think what we're seeing with Carlos is that he's obviously still hurt by what happened with Ferrari getting rid of him. Why wouldn't you be? How could you not overlook that? And he's now looking at it, and what is it, 3 years he's got with Williams? He's got 3 races now where he's got a race-winning car, at least at 2 of those places, maybe 3. He might not have a race-winning car again for a couple of seasons.
Vamos.
So really for him, you're coming into these races and it's like, what has he got? He's got nothing to lose. I know that's a massive cliche in sports, but you are literally dealing with a guy who, I mean, if he crashes out, whatever, he's got next year sorted. His stock is still super, super high. He's won a race recently. So I think he's coming into it in a really, really good place. And, and Carlos, we were talking about Yuki being underrated. I think Carlos is super underrated and obviously underappreciated by a big team. I still think any other team would have replaced a Carlos Sainz with Lewis Hamilton. That's why that's happened. But I think Carlos Sainz feels, and he's always raced with his chip on his shoulder everywhere he's been. And when he really feels like that is when he is at his best. So I think that's a really good call.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this preview edition of Unlapped. We will be back. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like this video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to ESPN for more F1 content. If you're listening, hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Liz Loza with Nate. I almost called you Nate Burleson, a football
Nate
player.
Burleson. I mean, I'll be Nate Burleson if you want. I'm on it. I'm on it.
Saunders, Laurence Edmondson, live from Las Vegas. Thanks for tuning in.